So one thing that we've noticed over the last couple of years is that things have gotten a lot easier in China. Things that used to be really difficult, like getting from point A to point B. Here we have something that everybody knows, Google Maps. Here we have two logos of organizations that are here today. We have our Berners Consulting office in Shanghai, and we have the way to get to the CLPA, also in Shanghai. And you can go on Google in English, you put in the address, we see the address here, they are in English, and you get the footpath. You can also do this with public transportation, you can do this between cities. It has the train schedules in it. It's gotten a lot easier. So this is one of the things that has changed in China. Another thing that is changing rapidly is the internet in China. And I don't want to spend too much time on this, that's not the topic today, but I want to point out a couple things. First of all, we see on the top part of the slide, we see the gigantic growth of the internet. And on the top part of the slide, the interesting part here is that the mobile internet, that's where the growth of the internet is coming from, with all the ramifications that that has, for example, for security, IT security. The other part is that with this increase in mobile internet, we see that the education level of the users, and here it's a little small, the top part is the university educated users, and the bottom part are people who have not completed high school. And so here we see that the participants in society at the bottom level of society, meaning people who have not completed high school, or also here these people who have completed high school, this is increasing rapidly, and this, of course, also is related to the workforce. So the shop floor operators today, they are internet users, and this, of course, has a direct impact on automation. Another thing that has changed rapidly is when we look at a map of the Yangtze River Delta, which is the economic center or the industrial center of China still. 10 years ago, we had basically all activity happening in Shanghai. And then it started to spread into the adjacent regions. Suzhou, maybe a city that some of you are familiar with. Of course, Changshu, with Mitsubishi's factory is right here, also in this area. And then it's spreading now along the highway that connects Shanghai to Nanjing. Nanjing is the other old center here. And it's spreading along here. Changzhou is the hottest investment location right now for foreign investment. And now it becomes interesting. You know, once we have this linear connection between Shanghai and Nanjing, it's pretty obvious what is happening there. It's pretty predictable what is happening there. Wage levels are rising. Land is getting scarce. So now companies are looking into the area. They're looking away from this linear connection. And we see now more and more companies setting up shop in places that are either north of the river or very far inland, or also here in this mountainous region more and more. This, when Chris Evans mentioned speed and distance, when you go into a Chinese factory, sometimes the dimension of these things can be mind-boggling. And whereas here in Europe, we have been trained to put everything in smaller and smaller spaces, this also happens in Shanghai, of course, or in Suzhou. But if you go further out, you will find very large factories. So there, this topic of speed not decreasing with distance that Chris Evans mentioned, of course, can be a selling point. But also, we see in these areas, we see very large increases in wage levels. Companies are being pushed out of these areas into lower wage regions, or they are automating. So many of the first-time automation users that many of you will be dealing with, they are private Chinese companies that are in this area and who are facing very large wage increases, especially in the yellow part. In the red part, very often companies have already automated or have already moved out. This, what we just saw regarding the Yangtze River Delta, that it's spreading, it's also happening on a national scale. And in 2005, the automotive industry was a pretty simple affair. There were 6 centers of the automotive industry, and each center had kind of a champion. And we see for example, Mitsubishi in Beijing, and the Germans in Shanghai and Changchun. Now, in 2011, this has changed just a little bit. Everybody is everywhere. And this is an old slide, it's 2011. It's getting even more extreme. And VW is building several plants right now, including in a place called Urumqi here in Xinjiang. This is pretty much the end of the world, one can really say. It's in the desert, and it's a political decision in order to create jobs there and be an anchor for the development of that region. But this also, of course, underlines the importance of having after-sales service networks that can service all these places. And again, this is a case for partnership. And this is not just the automotive industry. When we look at the growth, this is from 2010, 2011, we see where's the growth happening. The darker regions are high growth regions, and we see that it's not happening along the coast, which is the China industrial zones that we think of often when we think about China, but it's actually happening in the inland. This is kind of a catchphrase, you know, go west, inland development, but it's really happening, and we see it here. So their question is, especially for medium-sized companies, how do you deal with a place like Chongqing, which is this very dark region here, which is the hub of Western China? How do you deal with that? You cannot set up offices all over China as a small company. You need somehow to latch onto partners to help you with those kind of service activities. On the labor market, the time of cheap labor in China is over, very clearly. At the same time, we have some perceived contradictions. There are too many university graduates, and the answer is pretty simple. The university graduates simply do not fulfill the requirements of modern industrial companies. Changed is that the Chinese companies, state, and people are becoming more and more self-confident. This has positive effects, for example, in consumption, luxury consumption. It also sometimes has negative effects that then the official newspaper China Daily feels the need to remedy or to mitigate by saying that, no, we're not arrogant, we're just self-confident. This also, when you try to do business in China, of course, means that you have to deal with this. You have to take the business partners as equals. And also when you talk about technology, now this is where it becomes more difficult, because obviously the technology in Europe and in Japan is higher developed than in China, and the Chinese people know this, they want the technology. At the same time, they are very self-confident. And sometimes the problem can also be that they are sometimes a little bit too self-confident in their technological competence. And they think they can use a solution that they really can't use. And there you need to explain to them what they really want. And this is difficult even in one's own culture. Try to do it in China, where the culture is so different. So again there, it's very useful to be able to use a platform where a lot of this groundwork of explaining what is it that we're trying to sell has already been done. And another thing that's new is that we have Chinese world market leaders. And one thing, I'm from Germany, one thing that's very upsetting to us, aside from the obvious positive effects that we have very large Chinese industrial companies that are now buying products from Germany, from the UK. But one thing that's upsetting to us as Germans is that they have actually superseded us Germans as the world champions in traveling. This is a small aside, but here you see what this means. Again, you see the mass of people. And again there, Chinese people gravitate heavily towards the market leaders. They gravitate heavily towards the established hotspots in tourism and also in business. Again, always gravitate heavily towards the market leader. This is just a quick run through so we can get to the partnership topics. Just a few things. What do we think China will look like tomorrow? Well, the first is, there's many of these slides here. We see the UK here as in dark blue. In 2050, China will be the largest economy. Germany, which is number 4 just a few years ago, will be far, far down the line. And we have to take this as a reality. You know, exactly how the numbers work out, that's, I mean, we're talking about 40 years into the future. But the fact is, China will be the biggest market. And now it becomes a little bit more differentiated again. The working population in China, as of today, is no longer growing. It will start decreasing very soon, which puts a lot of pressure on cost, labor cost, which again puts a lot of pressure on companies to automate. This is just a little interesting fact. Urban population. Urbanization in China is progressing rapidly. Also, this good news for automation. Cities are more likely to use automation. Again, to give you an idea of the scale of China, we look at the categories that we have here. We have large cities, medium, small, and micro cities. And micro cities are cities less than 500,000 people. So cities like Brighton, Leicester, Portsmouth, they're micro cities in China. In Germany, of course, it's similar. Now here I have a comparison between China and the UK. In China, roughly, they're roughly evenly distributed between these categories. And in the UK, of course, there's only one city that fits the definition of large cities in the Chinese sense, which is Greater London. And 2/3 of people in the UK live in so-called micro cities. In Germany, it's actually over 80%. So again, what does that mean for your business? You have these super large metropolitan areas that you somehow have to deal with. This is just a repeat of what we saw earlier, a little larger. It's pretty safe to say that this trend will continue, and that it will be more and more growth in the Western regions, and growth is going to be more and more decentralized. Again, important because when companies are set up in these places, and these places are huge. So there are companies being built that have 1 million square meters of hall space. And there, when you talk about speed and distance, it's a real topic. So this is just a little primer on China today and tomorrow. And now I want to talk a little bit about partnerships. In our experience, in our consulting practice, we found that there are basically 3 main topics in Chinese thinking that are important for us Europeans when we go over there. One is that Chinese people work heavily on trust. They work heavily on relationships, on mutual support. They have a strong in-group orientation. They're extremely pragmatic. They're very loyal toward the group and not very loyal towards people outside the group. Try getting on the subway in Shanghai. There are many opportunities, so people often have a very short-term thinking. There's little legal certainty. Now, this can be a bad thing, but it also means if you take a risk and you get caught, first of all, the probability that you get caught is not very high. And if you get caught, the probability that you actually get the sentence that you deserve is very low. And Chinese people are extremely flexible. And this is also expected from other people, which I, as a German, can maybe say that probably we're not the most flexible people in the world in Germany. For us, this is often a problem. In the communication aspect, communication in China is very different from communication in Western Europe. Sometimes it's indirect. This is the stereotype. But sometimes it's very direct, and it depends on the situation. And this can be very surprising to people sometimes, to us, that suddenly there's a very direct no. And then your brain starts saying, well, I thought Chinese people never say no. Well, many exceptions. For example, this avoidance of direct negation. And in China, the concept of losing face is very important. Respect, and none of these things are rocket science. If I ask a British person, do you like to lose face? What do you say? So the question is always, how does it manifest itself, and what are the consequences? Those are the two things that are different. So in our experience, Western Europeans really like this trust thing. Once you find a trusted partner and you give a trust advance, then they reciprocate the trust, and then you build a trusted relationship. Of course, this is kind of a high-risk strategy as well. You need to be careful. This pragmatism can really throw a wrench into things. Sometimes we make a nice agreement, we make a time plan, and then the next day everything is thrown overboard because something changed in the environment, or some government official was promoted to a new position, and then suddenly everything changes. So this is not so easy a lot of times. And in our experience, communication is pretty neutral. Usually people who have been in China for a while, they do pretty well with this. If you speak Chinese, then it's still at a higher level. But in general, for business, where you have hard facts at the base of it, be it technology or financial transaction or sales transaction, communication in China usually works pretty well. How does business logic work? One could say we have three concepts. We have law, we have logic, and we have relationships. And in Britain, pretty similar to in Germany, it's a pretty clear direction. We look at, what is the basis of this? What are the laws? What are the regulations? What are the rules? What are the standards? Then we go into the logic. How does the business work? What is the solution case that the client really needs? And then we use those two things as a basis to build the relationship. Well, in China, it's a little bit different. It's exactly the other way around. So in China, the most important thing is the relationship. It doesn't matter who you are, it matters whom you know. And we will see that this is very pragmatic. It's not about old boys network, and it's not about corruption. It's really that you need relationships to get things done, because China is a pretty opaque place, and just to find the information, you need to know people, because you cannot just get it from the internet. So in China, it works fundamentally different, and companies that are successful, and I'll take an example of a company that is not in the automation sphere, BASF, German chemical company, hugely successful, with a lot of joint ventures in China, a lot of wholly foreign-owned companies as well, but hugely successful, and they are very much focusing on the relationship. And you can see this, for example, by the fact that they also carry these relationships into the public domain. They are one of the most active company when it comes to director-level managers attending or participating in panel discussions and so on and so on. They are real champions for these relationships, and it works for them extremely well. And then after that comes the logic. And then finally, we check whether it conforms with the law. But if it doesn't today, and if it doesn't hurt us today, then often it doesn't even matter. Because the laws change all the time in China, and in China the laws are very broad, and the implementing agencies, for example, the courts, they have sweeping powers of interpretation. So these law things, they're not so important as they are for us. So what does this mean for business? The relationship approach is the basis of everything in China, and it's also the one that is difficult for us Western Europeans to understand. And there it helps to have somebody to bring you into the relationship, whether it's a a government official, somebody from the trade promotion agency, right? Or whether it's a consulting company, or whether it's a school friend, or whether it's an association such as CC Link. And there, of course, the inherent advantage of these associations is that they're very large. And a lot of people, a lot of companies, and so they are very good platforms for this. The other thing that's very peculiar in China is that often there is simply no comprehensive long-term plan. And when Chris Evans mentioned that customers in Europe expect the equipment to run for 15 years, in China, often it is that especially in private companies, which is the lion's share of companies, in China, often people have a 2 to 3 year horizon for a machine. So this poses very different challenges, and this means that these all-in-one complete solutions are a lot harder to sell in China because they are so expensive, right? Even if they offer the flexibility that you can use them for 15 years. The reason why this is this way in China is because the market changes so quickly. So a lot of times, when you look at one particular market, then 3 years later, the market has completely changed. And so this is completely rational. This is not an irrational behavior. One thing that can really throw a wrench into things for us Europeans is that very often Chinese use a pick and choose approach. They want to see the full solution. They get the full solution from 3 providers, and then they will pick that component here and that component there and that component there. And any engineer in the room will say, oh my goodness, it's not really laid out for that. We cannot guarantee that our component will actually work in that system. But this is the reality. And this is why it's so important to use standards where such a pick and choose approach can be feasible. So these platforms are very important, especially because you will quote the full package solution, but the hit rate, the actual closing the deal rate, is much lower than it is here in Europe. There's a strong tendency towards market leader. We have already mentioned that a few times. Now I'll explain why that is. In Chinese companies, decisions are almost always made by committee. Whether it's a state-owned company, there it's completely opaque and you never know who's involved, or whether it's a private company who has a small circle of advisors. And so in this committee, obviously there's a tendency towards the solution that has the lowest risks. Because anybody who sticks their head out to propose a solution that's maybe better but has risks, for example, unknown company, well, if you stick your head out, you risk losing that, right? So that's why it's so important to team up with larger entities and to make yourself look bigger than you are. So if you can say that you're the market leader in something, then this opens the doors. Or you supply to the market leader. So the idea of reference customers, for us European companies, often this is somewhere in an important place on the website, but it's not on the front page. On Chinese websites, very often you will find this, maybe not on the homepage, but one level, the next place where people go to look is who do they sell to. Next point is you need local product adaptation. This does not just mean that the user menus must be in Chinese, but also that the product must be usable for the shop floor workers. And we had an interesting discussion earlier about the adaptation of I don't know what the yes, the brain-computer interface, which circumvents these cultural topics completely, right? Because it goes straight to the brain. Brilliant. You need local language and faces. So this is obviously something that which for small companies is a challenge and where a partner can help. And then the main question that Chinese companies will have, just like any company, is will it really work? How, if you're not an established company in China with 15 reference projects, how do you prove this? And again, having the backing of a large organization or a large corporation like Mitsubishi, which has a very, very good name in China, of course helps. And finally, and this is a very important point, you need to understand the influence of the policy framework. And here, this is a gargantuan task to understand the norms, the standards, how do they compare to the European norms, and so on. And this is, I think, when you talk about pragmatic value of teaming up with a larger partner, it's definitely on the influence of the policy framework, because it's the same for everybody. Yeah, so this is the easiest value you can draw out of a partnership. What are partners used for in China? Market information. Information is not available as it is here, and it is never trustworthy or reliable. So you need to get information from trusted sources. Synergies in product delivery, and I'd especially like to point out this point here on shared services, again, after sales service. How do you get into servicing such a large market without having a huge organization there by yourself? And then finally, build up and leverage your connections. Use the image that is associated with these large partners. It will help you to find customers and so on. And also, it comes to risk mitigation. When you partner with a large company, the risk that you will get taken advantage of by somebody is a lot less than if you're by yourself. And here, this is these are pictures that are a little bit emotional in their appearance, and that is for good reason, because in China, relationships are always between the people. So you need to get in with the people, and you need to work on the people. So where do you go? And this is, with this slide, I'll conclude. Where do you go to find useful partners? Well, first of all, for preparing your market entry, there's China business advisors like ourselves. There are market specialists. There are technology specialists. Then there's government agencies, chambers of commerce, policy experts. There's a large variety of sources that you can use for defining your strategy. And my recommendation is that use all those resources. A lot of them are very good and very competitively priced, or even free, especially a lot of the government support. So set yourself a budget for this, and then see how do you use this most effectively, because you will need a lot of information, a lot of support. So the most effective market entry initiatives that we see utilize all of them. And then for the physical market entry, of course, you need people who actually go do it for you. Investment people, environment is a big topic, corporate establishment, and so on and so on. And a little bit of advertising, I think, is okay. So definitely, of course, the CLPA can help with the top part. That's one of the strengths. So much information is available, and it's a clearinghouse. You can ask them, and either they have information, or they can point you to somebody who has the information. And then, of course, we also don't operate in a vacuum. We have our partners, like Desanchira and Associates in Shanghai, or Direct HR on the recruiting topics. So even for us, it also means without partnerships, there can be no success in China.